I'm Hilary Baker, and I am talking to you from my studio in Ojai, California, where I've moved very recently after living all of my life in Los Angeles. I was invited by David Lee and Coastline College to introduce myself via video, and then to do a separate second video of a studio visit. So because I tend to ramble, I thought what I would do is interview myself, hoping that the interviewer, me, will be able to keep the interviewee, me, from straying off course too much. So here goes. Here's the first question. What were your earliest influences, and do they still resonate with you, or have they changed? So I grew up in a very artistic family. We had a lot of art books, and I would lie on the living room floor and page through books. The ones that caught my eye the most were the German Expressionists, maybe because of their color, maybe because of the brutal imagery. But I also watched, as we all did as children, a fair amount of television cartoons, and I watched the classics, the Disney cartoons. In fact, I saw some of the really early ones, which were rather scary. But the one that stuck with me the most was a rather seminal cartoon called Gerald McBoing Boing that was made into a feature film, and also a few TV cartoons. And it was really a revelation for me. It was very artistic, very graphic, very poignant. It starred a little boy who didn't speak but made sounds, and it was really kind of emblematic of the 50s, and it's always stuck with me, so much so that I saved some money and bought one of the small gouache drawings that Jules Engels did for the film. So that, in essence, is a reason why my work today, I think, is so flat and matte and graphic. I think I carried that with me all those years. And I also, as an undergraduate at UCLA, because it was such a stellar film department there at the time I was going, I took several animation classes. And actually one of my films made it into some film festivals, but I did not pursue it. However, now, many, many years later, I'm thinking I'd like to try my hand again in animation. I don't know if old school, old style animation is going to be feasible, but that's how I would like to approach it as opposed to doing it on the computer. So, next question. You've traveled about Italy and lived there as well. Have your travels in Italy been reflected in your work? I, of course, was enamored of the Italian landscape and did my fair share of sketches on the trips that I was there, but I don't really consider myself a landscape painter. However, there was one afternoon sitting in the Borghese Gardens on a very hot day, trying to cool off, and I looked around me and started to notice the trees. And it was from that point on that I decided to do some paintings of trees, but have them stand in for something other than just what they were, perhaps as emblems of war memorials. I know that throughout Europe there are beautiful esplanades, and they're lined with trees, and the cemeteries are designed beautifully also, and they are to commemorate the soldiers that fought in World War II. And so I designed a number of paintings with trees, very statuesque, standing sort of as sentinels in honor of the war dead, and organized oftentimes in sort of a geometric pattern. And so I guess, yes, in that respect, also knowing that Sicily, for example, suffered terribly during the war. They were bombed, and so the trees have special meaning for me, and particularly the trees in Italy. Can you tell us how you made the journey from your early gouache paintings depicting the secret life of atoms to your portraits of animals in the urban landscape. Tell us about that journey. Well, way back in the day, right after graduate school, I was working in gouache because I had been working while studying for a textile designer, and I became very proficient in the really matte, flat, opaque watercolor. And I also was very interested in working on a very hard surface, one that didn't give like canvas. So I was actually quite wary of canvas. It took me quite a few years to finally get used to it and of course love it. But at the time, I had this sort of fey sense of humor about the natural world, and I thought, well, what do we know about atoms? What do we know about their secret lives? We don't know anything. They're too small to find out. So I did a series of paintings, gouache paintings, like I said, of the secret life of atoms, and I also did some monotypes that I painted back into. And I realized as I was working from first the atoms, and then because we moved across from the ocean on a bluff, right across from the ocean, I started to paint the ocean, the waves. I stylized them, but I would paint them. I painted them on paper, and then I did finally succumb to canvas, and I started painting them in canvas. So I was painting the waves, and then from the waves came the trees, as I mentioned. And after the trees, I looked around what was next in the natural world. I painted boulders, rocks, and gave them personalities, big paintings for me, 6 feet by 5. And from the boulders, I thought, well, when they're hewn, what do they build? And they build buildings. So I started to paint buildings painted out of these hewn rocks. And then because I had a studio in an older part of Los Angeles, I would take walks around my neighborhood, and I would look at the old apartment buildings, and I thought, well, the buildings also made apartments and homes for people. So I called that series Bones of the City. And from there, I was going to move on to whatever the next stage in the natural world was, but then I was invited by Coastline College to offer a painting in a show called Birdie. And so I did something I'd never done before. I painted a bird, and that was a revelation to me. And from that point on, I began to focus on wildlife. And having lived right up against the Santa Monica Mountains, in our backyard we had everything from bobcats, coyotes, even a fox. I began to paint what I called the predators, and that's the series I'm currently working on. But I also decided to paint the buildings in iconic locales in Los Angeles that are disappearing or have disappeared or may be disappearing. And I thought I would pair the two, the animals whose habitats were being threatened through gentrification, pairing them with these buildings. So basically that's how I came from atoms all the way up to my current paintings of wildlife. So thank you for watching, and the next video will be a tour of my studio.